Analytics don't work. Smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics.
The analytics don't mean anything in football. Take those numbers and you can make them say whatever you want.
The numbers, basically. What do they mean?
Welcome back to the Noise Podcast, Episode 2. This is your host, Max Gilson. The Noise Podcast is back, just in time for kickoff. This season, we're pulling back the curtain on the grind of betting an NFL season. With an analytical approach, real-time reactions, and an honest look at the highs and lows, each episode gives you a seat at the table as the NFL season unfolds. Whether you're betting alongside us or just here for the sweat, welcome back to the Noise. All right, we're going to start off today's episode doing some reactions to week one. Just leading off with a positive, honestly, for good old Roger. Content was pretty good overall. Week one has kind of replaced the fourth week of the preseason where teams and players just don't look right. You have a tendency for teams to start slow. I think we mentioned on the first episode how there's been a increasingly alarming trend with unders, and that continued during week one of this year, where I believe unders were like 13-3 on opening weekend. So that's been, something that we're going to continue to monitor. But after that kind of game to get right, I think teams start to settle in. Some teams that are, perhaps installing new offenses or, have big coaching changes, quarterback changes, they might take a little bit longer to pick back up. But I think overall it was pretty good, right? The Bills-Ravens game was electric on Sunday Night Football. We'll get into that one in a little bit. Monday Night Football as well. A bit of a sloppy first half, but, overall a very entertaining ending. So, taking a step back as a gambler, right, and just thinking as a football fan, we had a pretty good weekend. All right, now that we gave Roger his pat on the back, let's talk about some of the issues that we saw during week one. This is a growing trend in the league. Coaching continues to be a serious issue in the NFL. And I'm not talking about, do your guys want to play for you? Although we saw that issue in Miami with Mike McDaniel, excuse me. We're talking about decision-making, fourth down decision-making, kick versus punt, play call, stuff like that just continues to be an issue in the NFL. And I don't know if it's a confidence thing or, people are not trusting their stats. People are not trusting their own playbooks. But we're continuing to see more and more new coaches really struggle out of the gate with how do you make decisions in crunch time. Ben Johnson, for example, offensive guru, didn't know how to use his timeouts in his first game as a head coach. Aaron Glenn, also from the Detroit staff, aggressively goes for two following a penalty on the kickoff, which is the correct move, right? When you're at the 1 yard line, you go for it. Didn't get it. Okay. On the subsequent next two touchdowns, now in situations where he should be going for two based on the score of the game at that time, doesn't. What's the point? What's the point of going up, 9 when you could be up 8? I don't know. So I have issue with some of these coaches. I mean, Sean Payton, right? I think Sean Payton got a little galaxy brain on us here where, if you had the Denver Broncos against the spread, you might be pretty upset based on, where that number closed for people, 8.5, 9.5, depending on what you bet. You got screwed. Sean Payton should have kicked a field goal at the end of the game, incorrectly goes for it for kind of no reason. And that's, again, this is more to kind of defend the analytics community a little bit of, it's not right to just go for it all the time, right? We see Dan Campbell kind of take that overly aggressive approach where, yes, it is right and it is better to be aggressive more often than not in the NFL, but that doesn't mean that that's what you should do every time. And that'll bring us to probably, the most public of the coaching errors or, the overall mistakes made during week one. And that's with the Bills and the Ravens game. John Harbaugh what are we doing? What are we doing? The Baltimore Ravens simply gave that game away. Yes, I know there were very impactful plays that were not coaching related, right? Obviously, the Derrick Henry fumble has a whole lot more to do, with the loss than if he doesn't fumble. You have the ball that should have been a touchback the ball that should have been down at the 1 ends up being a touchback. Derrick Henry's fumble. These are plays that stand out, right? But the decision making by John Harbaugh continues to, snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, right? We're blowing 2 touchdown leads in the fourth quarter. Actually going into the fourth quarter, Baltimore is up 34-19. Allows Buffalo to score. They come back and score. And that's when things start to get awfully conservative. With far too much time left on the clock, John Harbaugh just overly commits to the run and starts to just run it into the ground. They get predictable and they get highly, highly conservative. Yes, Derrick Henry is one of the best guys in the NFL to get you a yard or two. But when you're talking about running into the ground 3 straight times when everybody knows what's coming, you're obviously leading to some issues with, giving the other team the ball back, especially when the other team is commanded by Josh Allen. You cannot be conservative in late game scenarios. Yes, the best defense is keeping the other offense off the field, right? You want to burn clock, you want to run the ball. You have Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is perhaps the best athlete in the NFL. Some could argue that this is the best player in the NFL with the ball in his hands. And you're not using him in late game scenarios. You're forcing him to be a guy that hands the ball off or throws, really, really basic concepts in late game scenarios. And it's almost like John Harbaugh is kind of taking this Kyle Shanahan mode of we're going to be the best team in football for the first 3.5 quarters, and then we're really just going to shut down. And that culminates with, the most public decision, but what ends up being, one of the worst decisions is when Baltimore is now up 40-38 following the touchdown that came as a result of the Derrick Henry fumble, right? You have an opportunity at 4th and 3 from your own 42, and you don't go for it. Now, a lot of people are saying, oh, well, you're in your own territory. Oh, well, Derrick Henry just fumbled. Lamar had a bit of a bum leg or XYZ. You must go for it. With 3 timeouts left, you still have the opportunity to get the ball back, even if you don't convert on 4th and 2. And yes, hindsight is bias, right? Or hindsight is 20/20, right? Where after punting it, they gave up a 30-yard completion almost immediately following. So all that yardage that they, created as far as Buffalo needs to get to, they gave it up within 20 seconds. So again, hindsight's 20/20. I'm not saying because that happened that they should have went for it, but you can see how quickly that can turn around, and you don't have control over that when you're Baltimore, right? You are now putting the control of the game into the other team's hands, and that's not how you win in the NFL. You win by being aggressive. You play to win, not play not to lose. And that's what Baltimore ends up doing a lot of times. And yeah, there's been a lot of fluke games for them, right? The Mark Andrews double drop last year, the Isaiah Likely foot on the line. There's been a lot of games that have kind of forced this narrative that Baltimore can't close. And, while I buy into it a little bit, I understand that some of those things are just fluke events and there's nothing that can be, there's nothing that can really be done about that. At the same time, John Harbaugh basically selling these games, that is something that can be done. He needs to get better. He's been coaching this team for how many years? He is potentially wasting a generational MVP talent, Hall of Famer in Lamar Jackson. They must get over the hump. This can't go on. I mean, at a certain point, when they play up against competition, you're going to have to put it in the handicap. It's almost like the Bills and the Chiefs, right? The Bills can't beat the Chiefs is the narrative, but time and time again, you've seen the Bills kind of tense up, not just from a player standpoint, but from a coaching and a decision-making standpoint. They have tensed up and really not played the type of football that has got them to that point. And we're seeing it with the Ravens. I mean, listen, I still have the Ravens as my number one team. They're still my number one power-rated team. They're the best team in the league, and they'll continue to be the best team in the league for 3.5 quarters of every game. All right, so bad coaching rant aside, I want to take us into something that I mentioned last week that we would do to kind of walk through what an NFL week looks like. You know, a little bit about how the players go through this, but as a bettor, what you're looking for. Because if you're like me, after Sunday Night Football, when, you know, your Ravens position gets blown up and, you know, you feel like you were almost counting the money, you know, until what happened. The last thing you want to do is start, you know, looking at next week's lines and start reviewing for the games that had already happened. But that's exactly what you need to do, right? Lines are open. Lines are open for week 2 right now, right? Or week 3, I should say, right now, right? You have look ahead lines. You can take lines that are posted at the beginning of the year, DraftKings and other outlets. They have all the lines available for all games prior to the start of the season. So part of what you're doing Sunday night is starting to analyze what are the fresh lines that have come out as a result of Sunday's games, and what differences can you notice? What can you see as far as overreactions, underreactions, stuff like that? So that's an important thing to do on Sunday night, especially after you've watched all the games and maybe you haven't had a chance to, you know, go through the box score or even rewatch every single game. But this is your first look at the next week's lines. And Sunday night, you're already going to start to see movement. There's a couple shows that come out Sunday nights. You know, they sometimes have impact on the lines as well, just because people watch and people, you know, start to tail. But limits are really low at the beginning of the week, right? As we get throughout the week, limits increase. This doesn't really matter so much for the average everyday bettor, right? You and I might not be concerned with the difference between, you know, a $5,000 limit and a $25,000 limit. Perhaps, you know, you never know. But that's when that's what sharp bettors are worried about. So Sunday night, most of these, you know, syndicate groups or sharp bettors or any of that, they're not getting a full stake down on a look ahead line or, you know, a freshly open line. So you have the opportunity to kind of get into the market before some of these market makers start to shape the line. And if you can get an idea of, you know, where the line might be going, now this is a great opportunity to get some CLV or closing line value. Closing line value does not mean you're going to win your bet, right? If you bet at 5 and the game closes 6, once the game starts, anything can happen. That being said, closing line value is often a good measure for whether or not you're beating the market. And in this case, sometimes you're beating market makers or sharps to the punch. And that's something that you can do Sunday night into Monday morning. Come Monday morning, usually it's about 10, 11 o'clock Eastern time, you start to see a lot of movement. A lot of the stuff from Sunday night sometimes gets bought back. People have had a chance to run models. People have had a chance to re-review games, watch games, and kind of fill in that missing information gap. So Mondays becomes a really big movement day earlier in the week with low limits. So after Monday, naturally comes Tuesday. Tuesdays are a day off for players generally. They're not really, you know, they're not doing much, and there's not a lot of market movement because there's generally not a lot of news that comes out, right? Monday, you'll get, you know, your fresh news, fresh interviews from Sunday coming out. But Tuesday is kind of a bit of a lull in the week. There will be movement. There will always be something that happens, but you won't see it on such a big scale as you'll start to see later in the week, right? And now we get into Wednesday. Wednesday is the first day of real practice. It's usually a lighter practice. A lot of players that are not playing, you know, they might get a DNP for that day. That doesn't always correlate to them not playing, but getting in a limited practice on a Wednesday is usually a good sign for players, right? You're actually able to get in on one of the lighter days. And that's when you'll start to see a little bit more market movement based on those lists. And you can find that on the NFL. There's a bunch of guys that you can follow on Twitter who are at these practices, who are telling you who's on the field and who's not. What does limited participant mean, right? Sometimes you get an LP designation, but you really just played 3 snaps and then they put you away, right? So you can start to gather information on what's happening during that practice and really who's injured, what changes are the teams making. And that's when you start to see some movement. Come Thursday, right? Very big day for injuries. That's the biggest practice day, right? It's your full pads or your full practice that you're getting is generally on a Thursday. And we should also caveat that this is applying to the teams that are playing Sunday to Sunday, right? If you have any sort of, Thursday night game, Monday night game, these timelines shift. Any sort of specialty travel, right? We're seeing that a lot. There's nothing for week 2 to be concerned with, but seeing that a lot with London games, Germany games, Mexico games. This kind of goes out the window for those, but we'll get into that, as they come up throughout the season. So for Thursday, right, you're getting a bunch of, new information. You're getting guys that maybe didn't practice on Wednesday start to practice. This again is a good sign for them to that they're going to play on Sunday. And this is all kind of to try to understand what that mysterious Q designation is, right? The question mark, the questionable designation. It's not a 50-50 all the time. It can depend on, what's going on in that week and who's available and stuff like that. So that's when you really start to get a sense of, who's a true questionable and who's a potential questionable. Friday, last day of the practice cycle. You're getting a shorter practice that day for the guys, but this is also an important day to see if somebody is able to go, right? If they're DNP all week, now they're a true questionable for Sunday. If you start to get in a couple limiteds and perhaps by Friday you get in a full practice, generally those guys are going to be good to go, and they might even remove the questionable designation before Sunday. So those are things you want to look for, right? You want to look for players that are injured, players that need to be replaced, schemes that are being implemented during the practice. So these are important things to watch out for during the week. And I would also caveat that this is the time for you to take advantage of some uncertainty, right? If you feel like you have a good pulse on who's going to play and who's not, you want to be betting into it before you get to Sunday, right? And that'll lead you to Sunday morning, right, where you're going to finally start to get, if you play fantasy football, you understand the pain of not knowing if your guy is going to go at 4 p.m. or not. But Sunday, you will start to get the official, who's going to play and who's not. And there's ways to kind of get ahead of this as well. You want to look at practice squad elevations, right? If you have a cornerback that's questionable all week, he didn't practice all week, and next thing you know, come Sunday, someone's been elevated from the practice squad in the back to play DB. That guy's probably not going to play. And these are things you're going to start to pick up on. You're going to start to pick on, what teams are better with giving information, who gives a lot of smoke screens. Looking at you again, Kyle Shanahan, as the 49ers are known for some injury magic sometimes. But we'll just cut this actually. Right? So now we're at Sunday. Most of the lines have been bet up. And a lot of times, they'll tend to get, they'll reach their peak sometimes in the middle of the week and kind of start to get bet back a little bit closer to that opener. And that's something that we've been noticing, over the last couple of years. So again, you just want to pay attention to when this stuff happens, right? If you have something that you really like or, you really want a piece of information, you kind of know what days you're going to get it. And if you feel like you have enough information, well, now you know when to kind of get ahead of some of those things, so you're able to beat the market and get some closing line value on your bets. So this kind of leads into, starting to think about what's actually important to your bets, right? player availability, player rating. Obviously, these are vastly important, right? And, knowing kind of who's good, but at the same time, what are they in relation to a point spread, right? If you have a star quarterback, right, this is going to cause a line to swing from -7 to -1, right? Or, for example, right, the 49ers this week, Brock Purdy's not playing more than likely on Sunday, right? This is a look-ahead line of 7. This reopened at 6.5. Kittle news comes out that he's going to be out. Now we're down to 5.5. There's some speculation on Purdy. And now at the time of recording, this is a -3 for the 49ers. And, Brock Purdy makes up the majority of that line. And I think once it's confirmed, it might be confirmed already. You might see a little bit more movement on that as well, just because Brock Purdy is super impactful to the line. But in another situation, right, a cornerback that is replacement level, that is going to be replaced by someone that's replacement level, that's not super important. And this is going to lead into my PSA, public service announcement to everybody out there. Stop getting scammed. You are allowing people to give you information that is simply not signal. You have all these guys on Twitter that go out and say, oh, well, these guys have scored 30 points in their last 5 games dating back to last season, when perhaps last season they had a different coach, a different quarterback, a different offense. And they're going to say that that's a good reason for you to think that they're going to have 30 points again. You have another great example of one of my favorite things to see are watered down parlays. Guys, what are we doing? You're betting on a bunch of wide receiver ones to get 50 plus yards at -400 each, because in your mind you say, well, if he averages 75 yards a game and his line's at 80 every game, then he must get 50, right? No, that's not how you bet football. It's not how you price anything. And that's what people often miss in this situation where, you're talking about quantitative stats or quantitative figures that don't have price attached to them. And this is where people really, really start to mess up and start to lose their money betting the NFL. You gain nothing by doing a bunch of research into how a player has done over the last few games. It doesn't necessarily translate. You need to have a why, right? If you want to tell me that, somebody's going to be over 50 yards, and you're telling me it's a 75% chance based on the implied probability of the line, you better tell me why, right? You have to have a really good reason as to why that makes sense, right? Because most of the time, when you take a negative expected value bet and then you stack it with 7 other negative expected values bets, your minus EV compounds, right? You are going to be expected to lose each individual leg multiplied by each other. This is extremely bad bankroll management. This is the way to lose. But, somebody's going to hit one every week. Somebody's going to hit a big parlay with 37 guys and tell you that they knew something. They're going to tell you that they're a guru. They're a whatever superlative they want to use. I'm telling you right now, it is a sham, a scam, a whatever. Don't buy into stuff like that. Really think about why a line is placed where it is and what's the probability that your player goes over that line, right? A lot of that can be done with modeling. A lot of that can be done using projections, and there are tools out there that you can do, right? You can always join the Noise Discord, which is free. We have, the capability to kind of look at some stuff. I do my own projections that I can share with you guys within there. These are tools that you can use to actually judge a projection or judge something that you think, against the line, and you can adjust that stuff, right? We had an example in the Discord the other night on Monday. This didn't work out, but we were kind of speculating, right? What's Adam Thielen's role going to be? Right. And we ran modeling with him at either wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3, playing around with the usage rates and trying to see, what does those projections look like, all to try to make a bet on what we think is going to happen. We obviously Adam Thielen had really low usage. It looked like It looked like Naylor was the number 2 out there. They run a ton of 12. So, these are things that we're taking into account. But again, remember, it's not a good bet just because somebody that has, 20,000 followers and a blue check told you to bet it. All right, let's move on from that rant and kind of start to talk a little bit about what our plans for week 2 are. So first things first, I want to talk a little bit about Survivor. As many of you know, Survivor is a really popular contest. If you don't know how it's played, right, you pick a team, one team every week. All they have to do is win, and you can't use that team again. And there's Circa Millions is the most popular. DraftKings hosts, every major sportsbook hosts this. So there's always an opportunity for someone to play Survivor. And I think we'll, what I said I was going to do last week was kind of talk through what a Survivor entry for me looks like and what are some options this week, right? So, as you're kind of going through the schedule, the one that obviously stands out is Baltimore. Baltimore is a 12-point, depending on where you look, favorite to the Browns. I'm not sure how the Browns were able to lose that game on Sunday, but Baltimore is a heavy favorite and will therefore be extremely popular to be picked. So basically the conversation I want to have regarding Survivor is trying to think about your future equity. Think about the use case for using a team now versus later, and then also thinking about what the pool is going to do so you can try to gain some leverage. Right now, I think there's some projections, and these are kind of hard to use, right? You get these kind of Survivor projections from different sites and stuff, and it's hard to say that they really know. It's almost like, when you play in DFS, when someone says, there's the projected usage of a certain player, is a certain percent. And again, to an extent, right, this is all market-based. It's all research-based, I should say, data-driven. So maybe these things are better than something that I could come up with. But I do take that with a kind of a grain of salt of, I don't know how they derive these projections that, let's say 45% of the pool is going to use the Ravens. I don't know if that number is necessarily correct or not. But, let's use what we have just to say that we know that the Ravens are going to be a particularly popular pick this week. So you have 2 questions for yourself, right? If you think about the future, you think about later on in this competition, should you survive, you're probably going to want to use the Ravens, right? If you're in a competition that has any double weeks or anything like that, right? Having a team that's going to be, a pretty strong favorite down the line that has schedule opportunities that you're going to be able to use. That's when you want to use a team like the Ravens. And to add to that, right, if 40% of the pool uses the Ravens, your leverage becomes not to use the Ravens. And I don't want us to confuse, me saying don't use the Ravens with I think the Browns are going to win. I don't. But when most people need a certain outcome, you needing a different outcome gives you inherent leverage over the pool. And that's the way that you win Survivor. We mentioned this last week. There's no point in coming in second place. You must go for the win, similar to how you should play an NFL game. Play to win. Don't play not to lose. That being said, right, in weeks 1 to 4, 1 to 5, there is so much turmoil. There are many large favorites that are going to lose over the next couple weeks. And, we might not have a good explanation for why any of this happens. So you must survive, right? It's great to say, hey, I really want to use the Ravens in week 12 against the Jets. I think they're going to be in a good spot, but I need to survive to week 12. So I play a multi-entry strategy. I like to kind of mix things up a little bit and, get some exposure to different options. But like I said, I was going to do last week on the show, I kind of want to have a optimal entry where this is the one that I really like my path. Like, when you look at each week, right, you kind of make your pick and, based on everything that we're saying, right, the concept of having multiple options is a little bit suboptimal, right? If there was one good option, that you would want to choose based on the leverage, based on, who you think's going to win. Having other picks is almost like a hedge against yourself, which, in a lot of cases is suboptimal. So, again, I'm not saying that this is a perfect strategy. I'm just saying this is what I'm doing. And this is how I'm going to try to go about this season. So I do have multiple entries. I will play the Ravens and some of them. I can assure you that. So I just want to caveat that with this. But that being said, as far as my quote unquote optimal entry that we're rolling with is, I used the Cardinals in week 1. So for week 2, I'm looking up and down the board, right? Other opportunities are the Cardinals again, which I think, had not used them in week 1, I'd consider them to be the optimal. A lot of people will point at the Bills, and we'll get into that in a couple minutes, but I don't love the Bills. I don't love the Bills this week. We're looking at the Rams on the road against the Titans, and we're looking at Dallas at home against the Giants. So this is an interesting case of potential future equity, right? When are we going to get a chance to use these teams again? And are we doing ourselves a disservice by, quote unquote, wasting a team now? Tennessee, right? Tennessee is a good team to bet against right now because of all the turmoil, right? Installing a new offense, right? Cam Ward, although immensely talented, looked quite lost out there at times. They can't protect him. The offense is not in sync at all, and that's going to take multiple weeks for them to figure out. So that could be a great opportunity to bet against them. And come later in the year, right? You could be looking at a completely different team, right? If Cam Ward is as good as we say he is, and they kind of get some stuff figured out, and he's a world beater, well, then you're not going to have them as a 6-point underdog at home to the Rams. You're gonna have them, rated higher. I'm not saying that's going to happen, and I do think Tennessee will be poor for the rest of the year. But this is the kind of conversation that you want to have with yourself. So for me, we're going Dallas. Dallas will be my optimal pick for Survivor this week. I'm looking at the future opportunities to use them, right? Looking up and down their schedule, this is a tough schedule. And this is kind of what we talked about during week 1 of the podcast, where we kind of looked at Dallas as a team that you can take alternate unders on, because this is a really tough schedule and a lot of stuff can happen that would cause Dallas to really, really fall off. I did like how the offense looked in week 1. I think they called a nice game. They really took advantage of Jalen Carter spitting on Dak Prescott. I don't know what that's all about. That's what he felt like he needed to do, so he did it. And the Philly defense looked pretty weak without him. The pass rush was not getting there. The run stop was okay, but the coverage for Philly is probably the weakest part of the defense anyway. So, without an elite pass rush, they were kind of left exposed. And I liked how Dallas moved the ball. I liked how Dallas took advantage of that. That being said, I still have a lot of question marks about their O-line. I have a lot of question marks about Dak's ability to avoid sacks. Going up against the Giants, and that, even better defensive line scares me a little bit, but that Giants secondary is so weak, and the Giants on offense they're my 31st or 32nd ranked team on offense. We cannot have Russell Wilson starting football games in the year 2025. It's over. All right. The guy was great in Seattle for those couple years. He had a great career. He's a Super Bowl winner. He was great in Seattle. His time is done. The veteran experiment with, bringing in Jameis and not starting Dart, I understood that move. I thought that was fine. And even if they did that with Russell and didn't sign Jameis, I'm also fine with that. But the fact that we have Russell just to create an extra buffer layer so that they know Dart's not ready. They're not going to go to Dart until week whatever. They can go to Jameis at any time and say, okay, well, we're switching the quarterback. We're protecting Brian Dable's job. And then they're going to be able to say, okay, well, now that Jameis has had his run and he's also not very good, although entertaining, now we'll go to Dart. But after week 1, after how poor Russell Wilson looked, you have immediate questions to Brian Dable saying, what are you going to do at quarterback? And he was non-committal to Russ. They ended up coming out and saying that they will start him week 2, but already question marks. He was extremely conservative. He was not mobile whatsoever. And I don't think the Commanders' defense is very good. Not that I think Dallas's is very great either, especially without Micah, but this team is, having that much of an issue to score points on the Washington defense. I do not think that they're going to be any better against Russell Wilson, with Russell Wilson at the helm. They have an all-world wide receiver in Malik Neighbors. Wan'Dale Robinson is a high-quality player. The offensive line is still missing Andrew Thomas, which is the anchor point and the most important player, so I will give them that benefit of the doubt. But that being said, I do not think that Russell Wilson should be starting anymore. And as long as he is, I'm more than happy to go against them. I would be betting Dallas. I'd be betting some Dallas alternates, right? There's obviously, a level of variability where if the Giants are able to get to Dak Prescott and cause pressure, right, he might end up not having the best game. But that secondary is so weak, and I am really, really concerned with the Giants' ability to move the football. I'm interested in the under at 44.5. I'm interested in Dallas alternates. I would buy up to 10.5, or sell, I should say, sell up to 10.5. And really, I think this should be a beatdown of the New York Giants at Dallas. So for those reasons, right, those are some bets that once I finalize those positions, I'll put them out in the Discord. But as far as the survivor pick goes, week 2, we're going with Dallas. Okay, couple games that I'll go over and give out some picks on to close us off. First things first, a position that I'm taking is on the Jags and Bengals over 48.5. We mentioned this before. How did the Bengals win? How did they win that football game? The Browns were all over Joe Burrow. The offensive line did not look very good. Myles Garrett got whatever he wanted in that game. The Bengals got 2 fluke interceptions based on wide receivers trying to go down with the ball and bouncing off the ground or bouncing off their hands and into the arms of a cornerback. I don't understand how the Bengals got away with that one, but maybe it's a little bit of retribution for last year with how many games that they were in position to win and they just let go. But long story short, I think that defense is really bad. The Browns, we knew were going to be a struggle, and even still, Joe Flacco was moving the ball just fine. I think they score a bunch more points if they don't miss field goals and have fluke interceptions. If they don't miss field goals and have fluke interceptions. Jags offense didn't look great. They looked okay. Carolina is probably the 30 or 31 worst defense in the league. And I think they should have played up a little bit more, but I am going to give them a little bit of a benefit of the doubt where it is week 1. They're still kind of rolling out a new offense this year. They had the weird lightning delay, not that should have really made a big difference, but perhaps just kind of getting out of flow, getting out of the rhythm. So I'd like to give Trevor Lawrence and company another shot to look good. I'm not saying that I want to back the Jags, but I don't think either team is going to have an issue moving the ball against each other. There are big playmakers on both sides of this team, right? I mean, I could list you the guys on the Bengals. You know them. The Jaguars with Brian Thomas. Travis Etienne was out there. He looked okay. We're obviously, committing to him now that Tank Bigsby has been traded away. So I think both teams don't have an issue moving the ball in this game. It opened 50.5. It went down to 49.5. I bet a little bit there, and I'm surprised to see it go down further. You got some 48.5 still left in market. I would bet that. I think come game time, you're going to see this close 49.5, perhaps 50.5 again. I don't see how this is getting bet down. So I think 48.5 is going to be the low point. And if so, I'm buying right there. Next game, we are talking about the Denver Broncos. What are we doing? Again, Daniel Jones was the story of the week. I used him in a DFS lineup, which yielded a pretty good result. But Are we ready to say that Daniel Jones has been fixed and the Shane Steichen Colts offense is going to be a top 5 unit and, no one can stop them? I don't know. I think that result has a whole lot more to do with Miami than it does Indianapolis. I do think the markets were correct to have some money go towards Indy in week 1. I think having, that upside with Jones being an athletic enough quarterback, never really having a great opportunity, never being in an offense that was designed for, his play style, never having an offensive line that was able to protect him. There was some upside here. And I don't think we saw all those things in week 1. I think we saw glimpses of it, right? Obviously rushing for 2 touchdowns, obviously, being able to score on every offensive possession. They had a good game. I won't take anything away from them, but I'm not ready to upgrade them from where we were at coming into week 1. I agreed with the initial market move that kind of rated them a bit higher than Miami, but I really think that this has a whole lot more to do with a complete Miami, sit down and basically check out of that game than it does that the Colts are going to be a good team this year. I think the offense has plenty of upside, which we saw, but I don't think that defense is particularly great. And making a couple plays against Tua, doesn't convince me quite yet that this is going to be a really good team. Taking a look at Denver, right? How Denver looked terrible. But I really think that this has a lot to do with rust than anything else. Bo Nix wasn't sharp. He made a lot of mistakes. He forced a bunch of throws, which, I don't think Bo Nix is a top 10 quarterback, but in this Denver offense and with this Denver defense, he does not need to perform like one. You need league average play from Bo Nix. And like you saw last year, you got yourself a playoff team in Denver. So I think they get back to baseline here. I think the defense will continue to look good. They got a ton of pressure on Cam Ward. And if you know anything about Daniel Jones as New York natives and former Giants fans, he can't handle pressure. Daniel Jones is going to be in for a day when the Denver Broncos kind of start throwing all they got at him. I don't see how this line opens below the look ahead, and especially that money was taken on the Colts. Look ahead line was -3.5, right? When this reopened at -3, I kind of figured we would hold there, if not get the hook. And plenty of money has went in on the Colts, pushing this down all the way. You can find a -1 offshore. You can find -1.5 pretty readily in market. And that's a play for me. -1, -1.5, anything under 3, honestly. This is a play for me. I am not buying this Colts team, being anything more than sneaky. And I think just Denver's defense is a big step in class above Miami's. You have guys that are not going to quit in the middle of the game. You have, guys that kind of got the rust off of them, and Daniel Jones is still capped by his overall ability. So while I did appreciate that they had a good game, and kudos to him, I think Denver is an absolute large bet this week, based on the market move. I am not in agreement of a downgrade of Denver. I'm not in agreement of an upgrade of Indianapolis. So for that reason, I'm going Denver. And for my last pick of the week, this will be my Sweet Gains frozen lock. Sweet Gains is a protein ice cream providing a high protein, low calorie option to help you with your fitness goals. And for that frozen lock this week, for week 2, we're going with the Bills and the Jets over 46.5. Is Justin Fields kind of good? Is that what we're ready to say? I don't want to give a massive upgrade to Fields, who has been, he's been held back by his overall ability, for many years now, right? He takes a bunch of sacks despite being incredibly athletic. He has a very hard time throwing over the middle of the field, but that Jets offense looked really, really good. After a couple weeks, if you tell me that it's really Pittsburgh's defense that needs to be adjusted and not the Jets offense, I'd be okay with that. I'd believe that. But as of now, I think the Jets looked really good. That's a winnable game for them, right? They kind of got a little bit of fumble, a little bit unlucky with their fumbles that caused them to lose that game, which was a good result for me, having used Pittsburgh in a couple different spots. But I think the Jets looked okay on offense. They did not look good on defense. I thought that Pittsburgh overperformed expectation. Right, you had a few big chunk plays by DJ Metcalf. You had Jaylen Warren was able to run the ball pretty effectively. And I think they're going to get a pretty big step up in class again with the Bills. Right, Josh Allen on the Ravens defense scored points at will, especially towards the end of the game, and I don't see them having any issue with the Jets here in this one. That being said, talking about those Bills, I did not like the way their defense looked at all. They did play Lamar Jackson and perhaps the number 1 rated offense in the NFL. We will caveat there, but I don't think that they were good, and we had concerns with them. And why we took such a big bet on the Ravens was, this Bills defense is not so good. They're really weak up the middle. The safety play was poor. The cornerback play is questionable. I don't think that this is a good defense right now. The Bills have a tendency to kind of play into the season where, towards the end of the year they kind of start to look like a better defensive unit and maybe step up in the playoffs, but as of right now, week 2 coming off of Sunday Night Football, I'm not a big believer in letdown spots, but if there was ever going to be one, it's right now. Going into MetLife to play the Jets, coming off that big victory at home, I don't think that you should be running to bet the Bills, especially laying 6 or almost 7 points. I think those 7s got picked up in market, but for me, it's the over. We already saw a little bit of action towards it, right? Those 45.5s have quickly become 46.5s. There are some 47.5s out there. I wouldn't necessarily bet that, but at 46.5, I think this is a good bet. I think Justin Fields is going to continue to let this offense move a little bit. And, if we have a 27-20 type of Bills victory, I really wouldn't be surprised. And I think the Jets are live. I think the Jets hang. The Bills are not a team that I want to be using for Survivor, for contests, for anything like that. I think the Jets are super live. And while I'm not betting them on the money line or on the spread, I think the over is a good way to get exposure to the fact that, the Jets could kind of keep up. The Jets could score on this Buffalo team. So that's my frozen lock this week. Bills and Jets over 46.5. Everything else that I bet will be in our Discord. Please hit the link. Link is in our bio on Instagram or anything on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, however you listen. We have all of our links in there. The Discord is completely free. Just a place for us to kind of gather our thoughts, talk through the games, release picks, obviously, and kind of, work our way through the NFL schedule. Discord is the best way to get all access on top of the podcast, where we'll try to talk through those concepts. And again, as I mentioned, going to try to bring on some guests and trying to get a more interesting experience going on throughout the NFL season. If you have any questions or anything you want me to talk about next week, please feel free to leave it in the comments or shoot me a DM on Instagram. That'll be all for this week's episode of the Noise Podcast. This is Max Gilson. Thanks for listening.